30 years or so ago, A.W. Tozer wrote this little book called Leaning into the Wind. It's a great little book on personal renewal, but what caught my attention when I was looking at it recently was this title, Leaning into the Wind, and this picture of the sailing boat on the front. And it seems to me to be a great metaphor of what God is doing with us as a movement. You see, the task of any crew on a sailing boat is to see or discern where the wind is blowing and tune their vessel accordingly. The power is in the wind. The job of the crew is to lean into the wind. Now, the encouraging thing for us, although sometimes it might not seem so, is that God is always working. The wind is always blowing. Jesus said, "My Father is always working." This Ruach wind of God brings life and movement and direction into lives that appear hopeless, stagnant, and directionless. Our task is to see or discern where the wind is, give attention to that, and to lean into it. One way that we can do this, one way that we can discern God's activity, is to reflect on where we see God at work. Now, reflection is something that needs to be cultivated as a spiritual discipline. The more we reflect, the more we will see. And we can practice this on a personal level once or twice a day, just stopping for 5 or 10 minutes and replaying the last number of hours in our mind and thanking God for where we've seen him at work and confessing when we've been out of step with him and recommitting ourselves to him for the next period of time. Another way that we can discern God's activity is by telling stories to one another. The scriptures call this stirring one another up. Now, when we hear where God's been at work, it causes us to thank God. It causes us to want to cooperate more with God. It lifts us out of gloom and negativity and keeps us positively focused on the fact that God is indeed working. And it changes our perspective. Our radar goes up. We start to approach each day with an expectancy that God will work because, as we know, God is always working. Now, so often the church can get down in the blues. Oh, we're not like the book of Acts. Oh, we need to be more committed. We must be doing something wrong. And we get very introspective and navel-gazing and do guilt trips to one another. Look, I've been there and perhaps you have been too. But if my perspective is God is always working, then I'm going to see this. I'm going to see him at work. And then as part of God's crew, I can lean into the wind, cooperating with his power, his refreshment, his blessing, his momentum. Now, this might all sound a bit naive, but we serve an awesome creator God who is still creating life and hope wherever his Ruach Spirit blows. And I find that massively encouraging, and I hope you do too.